Welcome to Spinning Back Clique, where each week here at MMA Junkie, we take a spin through the biggest stories in MMA. On this week's docket, UFC 294 in Abu Dhabi has a main event. We'll tell you about it. Israel Adesanya, he's still looking for a dance partner. And Salt Lake City, are you jazzed up for this weekend's card? Fada, you're a hoopster. I hope you appreciated that silly joke. All that and much, much more. Hello, everyone. I'm your host, Gorgeous George, and with me, as always, some of the sharpest minds in MMA. Joining me this week, SBC creator Goes from MMA Junkie Radio. He's here in Sin City. Danny Segura is back. That's Lionel Messi's new neighbor. He joins us from the 305, and our international superstar reporter Farah Hanoun links up with us from Morocco. Cold coffees on the ones and twos. Let's get to it. Abu Dhabi, you have your main event. Islam Makhachev will be defending his lightweight title versus Charles Oliveira at UFC 294 on October 21st. Fresh off his win over Beneil Dariush last month, Chucky Olives now gets another crack at Makhachev. Paulo Costa and Khamzat Chimaev will tangle in the co-main event, in case you're wondering. The UFC has partners in Abu Dhabi, guys. So they usually like delivering for them and stocking those yearly cards when they come to town. In your eyes, did the UFC nail it or nah? Danny, you go first.
They did, considering the scenario that they were presented in, because there were no options, or at least options that made sense. There was a few names thrown out there, Volkanovski being one of them, which obviously I would love to see that fight at some point, but I would hate for the first two title defenses of the lightweight champion to be against a non-lightweight, against the 45 champion. That doesn't make any sense to me. The winner of Poirier versus Gaethje, which we will see this Saturday, that sounds nice, but we know how their first fight went, plus their history, so we know they're going to take some damage in that fight. I mean, it is the BMF title fight for a reason, and you just start looking around at what's left at 155, and there's really no clear opponent for Islam Makhachev. That name, I think, should have been Beneil Dariush. They should have saved him for a title fight. It would have felt big. It would have felt like, hey, look, a deserving contender in a lengthy win streak. We only have Charles Oliveira coming off a single win since losing to Islam Makhachev, so that's not ideal. But they end up booking that fight, and the winner was Charles Oliveira. So at the end of the day, given the current circumstance which the UFC found themselves in, I think this is the best scenario. And I'm actually a bit surprised. I don't know how you guys feel about this, but I've seen a lot of enthusiasm about this fight and still a lot of doubt on who will the winner be, despite literally watching this fight a year ago and having a clear dominant win for Islam Makhachev. It just seems that Charles Oliveira, now I believe he's called Illuminated Charles Oliveira. That's what's going on online. A lot of people still have high hopes for him. A lot of people still think he can get the job done enough to cause a lot of buzz, a lot of interest in this title fight. So I do think this is the best option the UFC had given the current circumstances.
All right, Fada, I know you'll be there to cover the event for us. What do you think? Did this make a good enough splash for your neck of the woods?
Yeah, this is the thing. So I agree with Danny in the sense that they had no real choice, because Volkanovski's coming off of surgery. He said he'll be ready, but we can't guarantee that. And then you've got Gaethje. I just listened to an interview that he did with CBS Sports, and he was saying 0% chance I probably would have turned around if I beat Dustin Poirier. We both know that those guys get into a car crash type of fight. So with tickets going on sale and stuff, they kind of needed a fight. So waiting on either Volkanovski to be healthy or an outcome between Gaethje and Poirier where we know we're kind of guaranteed a war, it's kind of tough to rely on that. So I'm not against it. And at the end of the day, Oliveira has wins over the entire top five, being Michael Chandler, Justin Gaethje, Dustin Poirier, and Beneil Dariush. So when you look at it that way, he deserves that rematch. It's just, my only question is, and it's probably something that I would want to ask fans in Abu Dhabi maybe once I touch down, is their enthusiasm level, because like Danny said, we just had this fight a year ago and it was a pretty dominant showing for Islam Makhachev. So that's kind of what I want to ask, if perhaps are the people that are buying tickets for this, is the enthusiasm level the same, getting the exact same main event, or is it just about, we get to see Islam Makhachev compete? Now, don't forget, this was the worst case scenario for Charles Oliveira last year. I feel like it couldn't have gone worse for him. So there is that idea to think that he probably will do better than he did last year. So in that regard, so I'm a bit kind of 50-50 about it, but I understand why the UFC went with it. And I'm not saying that Oliveira doesn't deserve another shot. It's just the way he lost last year. I can understand why it could be a tiny bit of a hard sell for fans that are buying tickets.
All right. And goes, let's get your take. But before that, let me also sprinkle this in. We interviewed Charles Oliveira at the UFC Fight Expo. He showed no interest in going to Abu Dhabi. In fact, he didn't want to fight in October. He said maybe November or December. And you could just see his body language because he had probably been asked this question all over Radio Row, but he really wanted to get the message across. I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it. So that, and along with taking Costa off UFC 291 and putting him on this card, for me, it just didn't have that impact. How about you?
That's an interesting way of looking at it. You're right. And as Danny and Farah brought it up, it's kind of interesting. I would want to see how people react to it on that side of the world because even though on paper, yeah, it's a great matchup, we did just see it. I wonder if they were kind of hoping to see something different. The matchup itself is really interesting because you have a guy like Charles Oliveira who obviously has a lot to prove, right? Coming into this fight, there's a lot for him to prove. But on the other side, you have a guy coming in off of a win who feels like he's got a lot to prove, right? People are saying he was pushed to the limits by a 145er. So both guys are going to be coming in with, I think, a little bit of a chip on their shoulder. I got to give Charles Oliveira props for taking this fight. You're right, George. He did not look like he was interested in this time frame at all. He did it. He's going back to the scene of the crime where this happened the first time, which I have to imagine is pretty tough to do for a fighter to go out there and just kind of relive where one of your biggest mistakes happened in front of millions and millions of people. Sometimes that reset of a different venue, different opponent kind of helps, but the dude earned it, Beneil Dariush, that is no cupcake. That is a tough fight. He went in and he got the finish. He earned everybody's respect. And then you add on this co-main event to this card. I'm more on the side of they nailed it than I am. Nah.
Okay. Well, let's do some follow-ups here. And I want to welcome the audience on Facebook. Here comes one from Facebook, Michael Lawrence. He says, I hate no one talks about Charles' mental state coming into the fight last year. That wasn't the Oliveira we're used to seeing. This time around, I believe he'll be ready on all fronts and takes the title back. I guess, Fada, can I go back to you? I mean, you covered the event. You probably saw him more than anybody. Is Michael Lawrence kind of on to something? I don't remember all this happening about a year ago, did it?
Honestly, he looked confident, but then again, fighters don't always show what's going on behind the scenes. So in terms of media day and his attitude, I was around his team quite a bit as well, talked to his coach as well, Diego Lima. No, they were oozing confidence heading into this matchup. There was I felt like kind of like a fire from Charles Oliveira. I don't know in the sense of if he felt like they were being underestimated or what exactly. But again, like I said, behind the scenes is a completely different thing. But somebody brought this up in the comments as well, something to do. Yeah, only if he, Michael Lawrence as well, only if he's actually healthy. Yeah, that's another point, right? Because he just, said that he might not be ready to go for October. And it seemed like that was the stories that we were all writing that, okay, who's next? Because Oliveira's not ready. And all of a sudden he's in this fight. So, yeah, I don't know if he's 100% healthy. I really hope he is. And then again, we're talking about the mental state. If he was just a few moments ago saying he wasn't going to be ready for October and all of a sudden he's fighting, I don't know. But either way, does he have the skills to make this a great fight? Absolutely. We just, like I said, we didn't see any of that. And that's credit to Islam Makhachev, of course. But because I feel like that was kind of the worst case scenario, if Charles Oliveira looks at it like that, like, all right, that was the worst I had, I still have a lot to show Islam Makhachev. We could get an exciting fight, that's for sure, especially maybe that he's not looking at Islam as invincible after that close fight with Volkanovski.
Dixon in the chat, I'm not going to fall for it, Dixon. He says it's a weak card. Here's the rest of it, to be fair. Nasruddin Imavov against Ikram Aliskerov. And then there's, I believe, Muhammad Mokayev against Tim Elliott, plus the other two that I mentioned. If you're just joining the show, Islam Makhachev versus Charles Oliveira, main event. Paulo Costa versus Hamzat Chimaev, co-main event for UFC 294, October 31st, Abu Dhabi. Yeah, tickets had to go on sale, so that's what they gave us for to start off. And I guess it's not so bad. Look, they'll probably stock it with some more talent. But again, I think some of, at least what I'm feeling, had to do with that conversation we had with Charles. I mean, Charles was so blunt. He even said, if they give it to someone else, I'll get the winner. I was like, wow, he's really passing things up. He must be hiding something, or he just doesn't want to get into another weight camp and have to go through another weight cut. fight camp, I should say, in a weight cut, and I don't know, kind of shocked me to tell you the truth. Maybe they just added a zero to that paycheck though.
Yeah.
But
That changed
come
their
fight night,
equalizer, right?
George, you're gonna have goosebumps, and especially when you add in all the little storylines that go into it, right? Like if Charles loses this fight, he's in no man's land, right? That's 2 losses to that
Mhm.
guy. And let's be honest, in the past, Charles Oliveira is kind of hard to match up. A lot of people don't want to fight him. So if they don't have to, I think they try and avoid him. And then when you think about it, like that fight that everybody wants to see again, Alexander Volkanovski, that if Charles Oliveira wins this fight, like we get further and farther from maybe seeing that fight. I don't know. Like it's such a weird thing, but I think come fight night, we're all gonna have the goosebumps, man. I think it's gonna be a good fight. I think overall it's a pretty solid card.
Okay. One more. Keep them coming. These are some good ones here. JD Realty YT says, question for the panel. When have you seen Charles start a fight with a jumping switch kick from miles away? The moment got to him. That won't happen this time around. Did you guys kind of see that? Maybe nerves, forget about preparation, injuries, just maybe nerves. I mean, he was going up against the guy that everybody said is Habib 2.0, and that's pretty much a scary proposition.
As far as the kick goes, I think he was just trying to get a feel for what a lot of Charles Oliveira, and I think there are things you can point to that maybe it just wasn't his night. But who's to say that doesn't happen a second time around, right? Like that's just part of fighting. It's what happens. Every fighter goes through it at some point.
Okay. All right. Well, we can revisit this topic if we have some time at the end. The questions were great. Let's get going on to the next topic. Now that October is settled, let's address September's pay-per-view, UFC 293. That takes place in Sydney, Australia, as you all know, September 9th. That card does not have an official main event. We thought it might be Israel Adesanya versus Dricus du Plessis, though according to Adesanya, that fight could be off, and now Sean Strickland might be his dance partner. What's your reaction to this shakeup? Does the UFC deserve most of the blame here for not having the main event sorted out? Is it fair or foul for me to say that? Farah, we'll start to you.
Well, this is a very similar situation to the Islam Makhachev headlining Abu Dhabi thing, right? Because when those shows were announced, the UFC knew who they wanted as a headliner. Now, the problem is the timeline doesn't always pan out where you're going to have a challenger that's ready to go. I know that Adesanya had said that Dricus has a sore foot, and he kind of mocked him, and he said he's not going to be ready. He said, all right, let's go Strickland. But I was just listening, and I wrote a story off of this morning. I was listening to an interview that Dricus did on his teammate Cameron Simon's podcast. He never said he was not going to be ready for UFC 293. Now, maybe Adesanya knows something that we don't. Maybe he spoke to the UFC. But Dricus, that podcast he did was 4 days ago, perhaps a day after Adesanya put out that statement. And I'm going to read a part of the quote real quick here. He said, I'm definitely going to have to go on a little holiday. That's what du Plessis was saying. I've been active. You need to celebrate these moments. That was one thing that I thought when I landed on home soil. Everybody starts talking about, okay, what's next? Adesanya. And I'm like, whoa, I just beat Robert Whittaker, one of the greatest fighters ever and one of my heroes. I'm not going to be even talking about the other fight right now. I just want to, for this week, give me time to just celebrate this. So he didn't really say, no, I'm out, I can't do it. Didn't mention anything about an injury. Now, again, like I said, Adesanya could know something that we don't. So I'm not ready to say that Strickland's 100% in. Also, Strickland did an interview with Helenia, I believe, and he said, UFC, pay me. I don't blame him because he has really saved some fights for them, taken on short notice Nasruddin Imavov. So I have no problem with him saying that. But what is he asking for? Is he asking for astronomical numbers that the UFC is going to be like, no? But knowing Strickland, I don't think he's asking for anything astronomical. Again, so a lot of moving pieces. I don't know. I'm not ready to say that this is happening for sure. I think I'd rather wait until Dricus speaks out or the UFC just officially announces it. But like I said, this all happened because Sydney, they want Adesanya as the main event, exactly what we saw with Islam Makhachev. Abu Dhabi, they want him as the main event, and that's why we're getting the Oliveira rematch.
All right. How about you guys? What was your reaction to this possible shakeup? Again, I'm saying possible because we don't know anything official yet. And is the UFC to blame for kind of taking a while, when we're less than 2 months away?
Yeah, I mean, you definitely want to be able to get in on that promotion and everything. But at the end of the day, if you're a fan and you're going to attend this, like really, as long as Israel Adesanya is attached to it, you're going to get your money's worth, right? From the walkout through the fight. I don't think fans really will be tripping at all, regardless if it's Duplessis or if it's Sean Strickland. Now, the Duplessis fight, that's the thing, is that one feels like it has to happen. Sean Strickland just seems like it's a matter of circumstances that he's there. Nobody's gonna hate on it. Sean Strickland's a good fighter. You know, he always shows you that he came to fight. You never see a fight of his and just say, "Oh, this guy didn't train," or he came in overweight. Like, the dude's always ready to go. He always gives you a good fight, and he's going to promote the hell out of the fight. He's going to get under Izzy's skin, which really isn't that hard to do. And regardless, I mean, if you get the other side of the coin, Duplessis, he's probably going to do the same thing. He's already kind of under his skin. So either way, I think it's going to be a win-win. I know a name that kind of got thrown out there as well as Jared Cannonier. He spoke up and he didn't really like the fact that his name wasn't being brought up. But this is the thing that you have to understand. You can't hate him for bringing it up. But at the same time, you're talking about a guy in Israel Adesanya that has a lot of rematches on his record. And to put another one on there, it's just not something that fans are going to want to see, I think, unfortunately, for Jared Cannonier. It's going to be a while, I think, before they get back to him, just because of how rematch heavy Izzy is. And because, of the heat that you could possibly get off of Sean Strickland and then DDP. Obviously, there's a storyline there. So I hope at the end of the day it is DDP. But at the same time, I kind of understand him having to kind of step away for a second and figure things out. But like I said, at the end of the day, Sean Strickland's not the worst thing in the world. I think fans are going to be happy either way.
All right. And Danny, before we get your take, let me go back to Facebook. Michael Lawrence is killing it. He says, is Drakus playing mind games with Izzy? Like, is this just kind of some sort of delayed tactics and eventually it will be him after all? You think? What's going on in your mind?
Yeah, I think it's possible. I also think, like the Charles situation, maybe they were ready, or maybe they just don't see it as the most favorable timeline for them to fight, but they'll play a little bit hard to get just so the UFC can throw them a little bit more money their way. Like, that can totally be a possibility. Speaking about Charles, and I know we touched on that already, but maybe he is ready for October. It's just he wants a little bit more money, and he sees an opportunity there to add a little bit to his check. This could be the case with Dricus du Plessis, or he could be playing mind games, as our commenter mentioned, just basically letting Israel Adesanya know, like, hey, look, it's also in my timeline. It's not whenever you want, and I'll say, I'll say I'm ready whenever I am. It's not your decision to say, hey, you're fighting me in this date. So maybe that could be it as well. We'll see. But I certainly think that, given the Robert Whittaker win plus the bad blood that he has with Adesanya, I think Dricus du Plessis also knows that he also has some power in this equation. Usually that's not the case for most challengers, so they'll just take a title fight on short notice, on enemy territory, under whatever circumstances, injured, because they know title fights are hard to come by in the UFC. But given the fact that Israel Adesanya has a ton of rematches on him, plus he is literally the most deserving contender sporting wise and storylines and bad blood and all that, and promotion wise, he's also just happens to be the biggest. He also holds some cards in this equation, and I wouldn't be surprised if he's also exercising them. So he's like, okay, yeah, go ahead, fight Strickland. I'll fight you somewhere else that's not your home country, somewhere else that it's not the timeline that suits you best. I just fought Robert Whittaker, just went through a training camp. So maybe we're seeing Dricus du Plessis exercise some of his power here.
Could be. This card is coming along a little further than UFC 294 in terms of numbers. We got Kai Kara-France and Manel Kape, Carlos Ulberg against Jundan Un, Vivian Araujo against Casey O'Neill, Tai Tuivasa against Alexander Volkov. There's a few more there, about another 5 that I haven't mentioned. But whereas the other one was top heavy, not this one. And they haven't been to Sydney in a few years, so you would think they'd want to get this in order pretty quick. Tuesday's matchmaker meeting day. So keep it locked on MMA Junkie here, as we got you covered 24/7. How do you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I was saying, like, if Adesanya said something about Dricus having an issue with his foot, maybe he does. And maybe Dricus told the UFC, just give me a week or two to let you know how serious my foot injury is. And maybe then he'll give them an answer. So I don't think Adesanya throwing that out there is something he made up. He probably heard something and he was just trying to get the ball rolling, being like, all right, after all this talk, all right, Strickland, come in. So maybe Dricus does have an issue with his foot that he just needs a week or two to evaluate and see if he can make 293. So I mean, maybe that's why we haven't gotten an announcement yet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that would reaffirm that Izzy can't do our job like he says he can. He's obviously not communicating the news very well then, if that is the case. But we sure as hell can't do what Izzy does. So we're even Steven on that one.
But
yeah,
at the end of the day, don't you guys want like the fairest fight? I want DDP to come in at 100%. To me, I feel like there's a lot on the line on this fight, not just belt, but a lot of pride, a lot of things have been said. I want a 100% DDP in this fight. And if I can't get that, then give me Strickland for the time being and come back to it. But I really don't. I really hope he doesn't just limp into a fight just because it's right time, right place.
Yeah, for sure. I want that, and I want Strickland or Cannonier if they have to step up on short notice to get paid as well. Because once you lose, it's hard to get back there. So you got to maximize. You got to weigh the risks. Is it worth the 7-fight camp in which a week or two is basically you traveling and then readjusting to another part of the world? That's hard on the body, man.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, sure. Danny, did you want to say something or did I miss that?
No. That's okay. I think we wrapped it up pretty well.
Okay. All right. Just checking. All right, folks, listen, right now is a good time for me to say this. Hit the like and subscribe button if you like what you're seeing. If not, well, I don't know what's wrong with you, because we got experts every week here for 1 hour that talk about the latest news in mixed martial arts. Unfortunately, we couldn't get them this week, so we got Fada, Danny, and Goes. But most of the time, we're stacked. You got to tune in noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. We discuss all the biggest stories in MMA. And if you want the actual notification of when we're on live, hit that little bell. All right. Of course, I'm joking. These three are awesome. Topic number 3. Is it just recency bias, guys? Or does Jones versus Aspinall sound right about now? At the beginning of the year, it was all about Ngannou versus Jones. A few months ago, it was Jones versus Pavlovich. That was all the talk. A few weeks ago, we were told Jones versus Miocic is booked for UFC 295 in November in New York. But if Jones wins and decides to continue fighting, what would you like to see next in that division? Goes, you lead off.
I think we all have short memories, when it comes to these types of situations. Like Aspinall did look great.
He sure did.
But there's a lot of time that we have to wait to get to Jon versus Stipe, right? And when that happens, Jon has to win the fight. He has to win the fight over arguably one of the greatest heavyweights that ever lived. Now, we haven't seen Stipe for a long time. We don't know which guy's going to show up, but it's still going to be a tough matchup, right? So when that happens, then we got to hope Jon's healthy to get into another one. Like, I just feel like, we're going to see Aspinall. We're going to see Pavlovich again. They're not going to fight each other. I promise that. But I think we're going to see them. And it's like the heavyweight division. It goes in phases. And right now, I think what's popping is that smaller guy that's quicker, but can still pack a punch. And that's what you get out of Pavlovich. That's what you get out of Aspinall. I think that's what makes things a little interesting when you're talking about Jon Jones, because we're trying to figure out different styles that can actually take this guy on. With Francis Ngannou gone, I'm not going to say it's slim pickings, but it's definitely a little less on the experience. Even if you go to a guy who we just beaten in Cyril Gane, like there's not a lot of experience out there. So we have to look at these things. Now, when you really break it down, we've been doing this shit for years, haven't we? Trying to figure out who's going to beat Jon Jones, what style is going to beat Jon Jones. Whatever we bring up, he has an answer for us. So chances are he's probably going to have an answer. But I'll tell you what, you can't beat Father Time. And eventually this dude's going to have to start to slow down a little bit. And guys like Aspinall, guys like Pavlovich, they're the ones that can maybe be right time, right place to take advantage of that. But for me, I still feel like Pavlovich has a little bit of a lead as far as who I think can take out a guy like Jon Jones. He has a little bit of a lead over Aspinall, but Aspinall does seem like he's still getting better.
Well, the Englishman says he will be front row for Pavlovich versus Gane. I like the way he laid things out, but even better, I like the way he performed on Saturday. All right, how about you, Danny Segura? Was Aspinall, did he become a front runner here in the possible Jones sweepstakes after Stephen Miocic? In fact, answer me this: who should be the substitute or whatever we call him, the backup?
Maybe Pavlovich. That way, he's a 2-time backup fighter. I think that there might be some history there. I don't know, especially if it's back to back. But look, no, I love Aspinall. I think he looked great. Clearly, he is. As you mentioned, George, kind of the new style of fighting at heavyweight, We've seen Cyril Gane kind of be the pioneer of that a bit, but it seems that Tom Aspinall is a little bit more complete. He's got the quickness, he's got the speed, he's agile, but he also has wrestling and grappling as well, something that Gane doesn't have, or at least hasn't shown it to this point. So yeah, he definitely seems to be like the I guess new heavyweight 2.0 or whatever you want to call it. But I don't think he's yet at a point to be challenging for Jon Jones, and even Aspinall recognized that. Like, yes, that's his dream, but he's going to show up in Paris and try to take on the winner of Gane versus Spivak. So I think he knows there needs to be some work there. And from a Jon Jones standpoint, like, yeah, I would love to see Jon Jones fight Aspinall, but I would love to see Jon Jones fight anybody. And I think the fight to make is always going to be Francis Ngannou. So long Francis Ngannou or Jon Jones, don't have a decline and then they start losing. But as long as those two guys keep winning, that's the fight to make. Let's not make any mistake about that. So yes, Aspinall is obviously an attractive fight, a good fight for Jon Jones, but there's so many fights that are interesting for Jon Jones. So again, I'm all in. We'll see if Jon Jones sticks around long enough to see Tom Aspinall become a title challenger. I would say no, because after beating Stipe, legacy-wise, there is very little to gain unless you somehow find a way to fight Ngannou. And money-wise, I would assume he's been making a ton of money, plus this new contract that he got with Francis Ngannou gone. I'm sure it's pretty stacked, pretty fat as well. So I don't think money is going to be an issue for Jon Jones. But look, never say never. We know that fighters in general just have the tendency to stick around a bit longer past their prime. They get a little greedy. Those checks are coming in nicely, at the end of their career when their name is the biggest. So maybe we see it, but I would, if I were a betting man, I'd say Jon Jones retires if he beats Stipe Miocic. I think he retires from the sport.
All right, good stuff from Danny Segura. Now, Father, you were live at the O2 Arena in London, so you got to see a live version of my man floating like a butterfly and stinging like a bee. I mean, he looked great. He made me forget about Ngannou versus Jones. Of course, I still want to see it, but Ngannou's signing to fight Fury. I'm thinking he's doing that, and now Jones has some possible opponents. How about you? What were your thoughts on that matchup? And do you feel like me, like maybe Aspinall might have stolen the show and moved up a couple spots here?
Well, look, I don't know if he even got touched against Marcin Tybura. So he had an incredible showing. He was coming off of an injury last year, obviously an unfortunate outcome against Curtis Blades, 18 seconds in, blowing out his knee. So he had a lot that he was dealing with going into the fight with Tybura. He looked incredible, got the quick finish. He even said he was expecting this to be a 5-round battle. And I almost weirdly think that would have done him better, just because those are kind of the question marks that were going into that fight. What if Tybura drags him into deep waters? What's Aspinall going to look like in the championship rounds? Now, I can't blame him that he's putting these guys away so quickly. But, he knows it himself. He said he's going to fly to Paris and he wants to fight the winner of Spivak and Gane. I think he should have called out Sergey Pavlovich, because that's the guy that was the backup, and that's the guy that was supposed to fight for the belt had Stipe not been around. So I think he should have called out Pavlovich. When he was asked about that, he said, look, I've been booked against him twice and he withdrew. So maybe he just doesn't trust that this matchup is going to happen if he is booked against him. But I think that's the call out he should have made, because Pavlovich is the guy that got people excited for a second. Like, look at this guy putting people away so quickly. Look at the power he's got in his hands. What if he touches Jones? Blah, blah, blah. So I think that's the call out he should have made. I feel like he almost took a little bit steam off of his own win by going after the winner of Gane and Spivak. Not because of anything. I mean, Spivak is very underrated, and Gane, obviously, he's been in the title picture quite a bit recently, and he has a lot of good wins in the heavyweight division, former interim champion. But I don't know. I feel like momentum-wise, he should have gone after that Pavlovich call-out. That's just me. But again, like I said, he explained his reason. He said he'd be down for Pavlovich, FYI. But you are kind of knocking off a contender, though, when you do that. So that would kind of be my only issue, and maybe why the UFC potentially wouldn't go that direction. But then again, is Jon Jones even sticking around? That is the question.
Man, can I ask you guys something? Like, not just you guys, but the chat room. If that fight were to happen, I don't think they would do it because they would knock off a contender. But if Aspinall and Pavlovich won, who would you lean towards?
Do you want me to? I could because of the grappling, I would say Aspinall. Now, I'm not going to look back at Pavlovich's UFC debut against Overeem and hold that against him, because that was such a long time ago. But I think Aspinall, maybe I would say, is the more complete fighter. But again, Pavlovich has shown us that he's got that touch of death. So I don't know. But I don't know. I think Aspinall, just because of his grappling, I would lean towards him. But both of guys have been putting guys away so quickly, so I can't even lean on an experience or factor. So just purely based on the matchup, I'd lean Aspinall.
Let's go to another member in the panel, George in Las Vegas. George, what do you think?
Well, I don't like them two guys killing each other off for sure. So I would not book Aspinall versus Pavlovich. I think we need a future to the heavyweight division because it is possible Jones could move on, but nowadays, who knows what these fighters are thinking? If that's their, I don't want to say lame, but sorry excuse for negotiating tactics. You know what I mean? And by sorry, I mean the UFC's made it that way. Like, it's not someone that has a guaranteed contract and just can honor it and they're happy about it. Instead, they realize that after every fight, they're popping just a little bit more, and now they want to cash in. Who knows? Like, Danny makes a good point. Okay, I know what he meant because I didn't want to like play a gotcha moment, but obviously Miocic, I think, is 5 years older than Jones. So he's really the older guy here. But Jones has been doing this for a while now, and a lot of times it's wear and tear. You know, not so much your date of birth that we kind of talk about. And I think for Jones, that's what it's been, is he's just been doing it for such a long time and at a high level for such a long time. I mean, think about how many championship fights the guy's had. A lot of them have gone to the whole 25 minutes. So it's like he's had a lot more fights than others have. But who knows? Because like he also said, these are some big checks these guys start to cash when they get towards the end. And I still believe, guys, that there needs to be a stadium fight here in Las Vegas now that we have a stadium with a roof. That means we're not sitting there thinking, oh, we can only do it this part of the time because it's too hot or monsoon season or it's too cold. No, we can have a proper fight here in Las Vegas. They don't even have to play the game about, I think back Croke Park. Remember when they used to talk about it, why they wouldn't go to London and Dublin? And it used to be like just getting all that production over there. It was going to be very, very expensive. And anyway, since neither Jones or McGregor has to headline that stadium here in Las Vegas when they do it. And McGregor hasn't even jumped back into the pool. Jones is now threatening retirement. That's the part that bums me out the most. And now Ngannou's gone. I thought he was another one that could have done it. Diaz is gone. I'm sure he can come back. But it's just ridiculous to me because I thought Dana was all in on once that stadium was built, he was going to beat Mayweather or any boxing superstar to having a show there, and they haven't. And I've seen some great stadium shows go off for KSW in Poland. Boxing, we had Klitschko versus Joshua. That was epic, guys. You know, and the UFC thinks had like 4 of them themselves. We got to get it. We just got to get it.
But I went to your restaurant and ordered chicken parm, and you just gave me SpaghettiOs. You didn't even answer my question.
But what was the question?
Aspinall or Pavlovich? Who wins that fight?
Who wins the fight? Okay. At this point, I like Aspinall a little bit more. I think he's more well-rounded, like Plata said. But I'm telling you, there was something. And I know JD, for like the 10th time, has mentioned in the chat that his head movement's lacking, right? But look, this guy's exploding, right? And he really moves around well. He has great footwork. And look, there, right there, I saw some nice head movement to avoid that punch. So I wouldn't say he's got zero head movement. But a lot of the times, I mean, this guy's just going in on it, you know, and with 4-ounce gloves, you know, he's trying to wonder whether he can get, like, look at him, a clinch, a Muay Thai clinch, or maybe deliver a knee right there. You know what I mean? So I don't know that we've seen enough to just put that label on him necessarily, but I really lean towards Aspinall. I think he's just more well-rounded, and I really love the way he moves around, and his hand speed is amazing. So that's who I would go with. Sorry about the SpaghettiOs.
I'm gonna go Pavlovich too. How about you, Danny?
I'm gonna go Aspinall, but if we want to switch this around and instead of, what'd you order again?
I ordered chicken parm.
Instead of chicken parm, I'm gonna give you some empanadas. If I want to sort of change the question around, be like, who is the biggest threat to Jon Jones? If Jon Jones obviously stays as champion, I think I'll go with Pavlovich. I think technique for technique, you're not going to beat Jon Jones. I think you're going to have to rely a little bit, and it sounds a bit disrespectful, but on the lucky punch. And man, if anybody can maximize sort of that lucky punch factor, that puncher's chance factor, it's got to be Pavlovich, right? Like his power, his speed is unseen at heavyweight. And also he's got this thing that goes beyond just the physical. It's kind of this I don't give an F attitude, in the sense that I can see a scenario, and I'm not saying this will happen. Again, all respect to Aspinall, but I can see a scenario where, he talks so highly of Jon Jones that maybe the moment does get to him and he underperforms or just isn't himself. But like when it comes down to Pavlovich, I feel like you put anybody in there. I mean, you can bring Muhammad Ali back somehow, like, from in a time machine prime, and he still wouldn't show him any respect. It just seems like Pavlovich just goes in there to put you out. And I feel like that's kind of what's needed to beat a guy like Jon Jones. So I'll pick Aspinall to beat Pavlovich, but who has the better chance in beating Jon Jones, I'll go with Pavlovich, if that makes any sense. There's your empanadas, George. I mean,
I love it. I love it.
Thank you.
Let's go to the next topic here. While UFC London didn't smash like it usually does, it did have some buzz, and most of that buzz can be attributed to Tom Aspinall's successful comeback. But let's give some shine to someone who might have flown under the radar and tell us why. Danny, we're going to go back to you. Go for it.
I'm going to go with Nathaniel Wood. He is 3-0 since moving up to 145. He does seem a little bit smaller than the rest of the featherweights, but so far undefeated, and it's working for him. And he was always somebody, as soon as he entered the UFC, that had a lot of promise. I mean, his nickname is the Prospect. And I'm not saying that totally faded away, but I think expectations did lower. But I think with this run at 145, those expectations are kind of starting to get some life once again, because, he did have some setbacks at 135. But at 145, look, he's beaten Charles Rosa, Charles Jourdain, and Andre Fili. Those are all vets. Those are all very, very good guys. And, Fili at some point was ranked, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know if he's even still ranked, but he's looking good. He's only 29 years old. So I would like to see him get some of these big names. He called out Korean Zombie. He called out Edson Barbosa. I believe Korean Zombie's fighting Max Holloway. So that fight's not going to happen, at least for now. Barbosa doesn't have an opponent. So I feel like that's plausible. But I certainly like to see him get tested, because it feels like he may be one of the top 15 fighters in the world at 145 pounds. He's obviously not yet in the rankings. We'll see once they update it if he finds a spot with this 3-0 run. But certainly I'm starting to think that he might just be between, the top 15 in the world, and maybe he can take that further. So in order to get some proof to that, we need to see him get someone in the rankings, some higher opposition, and it's time for that. So I'll give Nathaniel Wood some shine here. Plus, awesome fight against Andre Fili. I mean, he got dropped. He dropped Fili. He came back from adversity. Just a fantastic performance. So very much enjoyed that fight from Nathaniel Wood.
Did you agree with the scores? 29-28 for Wood?
Yeah, that's what I had it. I had it. I thought Nathaniel won the first, right? Did he get dropped in the first? No, he got dropped in the second, I'm pretty sure.
He got dropped. Yeah, he got dropped briefly, and then he hurt Fili badly. And that's why round one went to him. So he got he got dropped like 18 seconds into the fight with like a straight left, and then
I scored the first round for Wood, second round for Fili, and then third round I did think Wood did enough to get the win. I know Fili was upset about the decision from what I recall, but again, a close fight, but still I felt pretty comfortable scoring it for Nathaniel.
Most of MMA decisions had it for Wood as well. Most of Twitter did. I think it just came down to damage. And I'm sorry, I know activity means something, but not according to the criteria. The criteria is really pretty blatant right now. And I think everyone is finally starting to see it. Even the announcers were kept bringing it up. All right, Fada, how about you? Who flew under the radar for you on the London card that you want to give some shine to?
Well, there are a lot of names that you could throw in there, and Sky V's and El Daddy threw Johnny Parsons, and I think he definitely deserves some rub for his fight of the night against Danny Roberts. He almost didn't make weight. He had to come back a second time, so that's a good shot. But the name I'm going to go, because this is called Under the Radar, is definitely Julia Storyalenko. If you're talking about somebody that nobody was even talking about, all they were talking about was how she doesn't deserve to be in the co-main event. I know they were looking at her record. They were kind of criticizing her past weight mishaps. Is she even going to make 125? She had weight issues in other divisions before, and now she's trying to make her flyweight debut. It was all negative headlines towards Julia Storyalenko. And even at Media Day, I was the only one who asked her questions. So if we're talking about under the radar and someone who was completely dismissed and underappreciated, it's definitely Julia Storyalenko. And you could see in those images there her emotion after the win. She ended up getting the first round armbar, which, if you look at her record, should have been something that we all thought about. Now, I'm going to put my hand up and admit that I picked McCann, but the way the fight ended, we shouldn't be surprised. I mean, 10 of her 11 professional wins are by first round armbar. So it's literally her thing. So, pre-fight, post-fight, she was talking about how flyweight is going to be her permanent home. She kind of brushed off at the weigh-ins, like kind of showing you, like, I mean, Molly was standing right behind, like waiting to see if Julia was going to make weight. So it was a lot of negativity towards Julia, and I can imagine she felt that. So to go out there, co-main event, to have a performance like that in quote-unquote enemy territory, which she says shouldn't be the case because she's from Lithuania and she trained with Roger Gracie in London. But yeah, I just thought that you couldn't have not been happy for her after the storylines heading into it, and a performance like that. And hey, she's won 2 of her past 3. She was on the brink of potentially being let go, and now she feels like she could make some noise at flyweight. So we'll see. I mean, everything she said pre-fight proved to be true on fight night. So just based off of everything, the negativity towards her and that outcome, I feel like she was definitely most under the radar.
Excellent choice and very thorough with the explanation. And I guess that actually, because when I saw her react the way she did emotionally, it kind of reminded me of Misha Tate. I mean, she would just let it go. And now it seemed like she was carrying a lot, getting ignored at media day or just kind of cast aside, and then having your opponent watch over you about the whole weight thing. Plus you're 1-5 going in. That's a lot of pressure in itself. But let me say this too. I know she won by submission, and everybody kept saying grappler versus striker. I thought she more than held her own as a striker versus striker against McCann. There was some moments in the fight where McCann was like, well, where'd this striking come from? She could just not get going. I mean, she did a couple times, but Stoliarenko's striking didn't look like it was, inferior to McCann's at all. So great performance by Stoliarenko. All right, how about you guys? Who was your under the radar performer for the London card?
I gotta go with my man Paul Craig. He gets my vote here. Look, I thought he was interesting at light heavyweight, but seeing him at middleweight now, that shocked me. I mean, he look at his body, his frame, he looks perfect there, man. Big frame for that division. And the thing about his game is, like, instantly he kind of presents a threat to whoever is at top, right? Because he's so good with his ground game. If you look at the fight, I thought he lost round 1. He was able to kind of get things back on track in round 2, gather himself. He fought through adversity. Anytime you have to fight at a different weight class for the first time, I'm sure it's got to be in the back of your head the whole time, right? Like that weight cut's got to be horrible. Just not really knowing that, having that recipe down just yet, how you want to look, how you want to perform. I thought he did pretty well for his first time at middleweight, and I'm happy to see him again, man. Like, I think 185 is a game changer for that guy.
No doubt. All great choices. I'm only going to give a shout out to Fares Ziam because he killed my parlay, but he did look good, honestly. I had a nice parlay going, and I was on Team Jai Herbert. So when Leon Edwards is screaming at him, I was like, yeah, man, tell him what's up. But I thought they focused too much on the wrestling. I was expecting a real more fun, pleasing matchup between the two. But even Fares, he went to some grappling, and I mean, it's great that both guys rounded out their game. I can live. It was just a $25 parlay, but it would have paid a lot, guys, because the other 4 came in and Jai Herbert didn't come in. So that one stings. But I got to tip my hat to Fares Ziam. Go ahead, Fadi, you want to weigh in?
Yeah, because I'm working on a little short video that I did on him through Fight Week, Abby and I. So the grappling thing, when I asked Jai about it in Media Day, he said Fares is probably going to be the one to shoot, because we all looked at it as two kickboxers fighting each other. And then when I spoke to Faris about it, he said he's expecting striking first round, grappling second round. Didn't really say who was going to initiate, but I was surprised to see Jai really kind of go for the takedowns. I didn't expect that game plan.
Well, tell Fires no disrespect that I went with the Englishman. It's just that the Englishmen usually top the French. Just ask PSG what happened the last time Manchester United showed up. But anyway, we move on. This week we have UFC 291 taking place in Salt Lake City, Utah. We will crown a new BMF, and Jorge Masvidal will be there to put the belt around the new BMF. As you all know, Dustin Poirier and Justin Gaethje are the two combatants in play here. Are you all fired up over this whole BMF ballyhoo the way you would be over a proper title fight? What two fighters are leading the way for the next BMF fight? So two-part question there. And Fada, we go back to you.
Yeah, I mean, listen, how could you not be fired up over Justin Gaethje and Dustin Poirier fighting? I mean, those guys always deliver, BMF title or not. I mean, these guys have entertained us fight after fight after fight. They're always fight of the year candidates, if not the fight of the year. Their first fight in 2018 was amazing. I mean, when I think of it as someone who pulls all-nighters to watch these fights, there is no way for a second that I would even think of dozing off when these guys fight. I'll make sure I get my coffee in. I'm not going to lie, pulling all-nighters is hard. Anyone on my side of the world knows that, but I know that I'm going to mentally prepare to make sure that my eyes don't even semi-close when these guys fight. And even if they did for some reason, the craziness and the madness and the wildness is going to cause the commentators to be screaming, and it's impossible to not be glued to your screen when those two guys fight. So I mean, BMF or not, I just think that these guys are both much watched TV. And when you look at stylistically the way both of them fight, it's going to be fireworks. And in terms of the second part of the question, the BMF title, now I don't know how they're going to go moving forward. Is it going to become title defenses, or are they going to do the same thing with Masvidal where they just put a fresh matchup? But if they do a fresh matchup, I would go Max Holloway, Conor McGregor. I think it's time that we saw that fight again. I'll never forget my sit down with Conor when Holloway just skated by and he pointed him out, and Holloway and his team were so excited about that. They felt like that was the seed, as Joey Diaz says. But they felt like that was what was going to set up the rematch. It didn't happen, but it could very well happen when you see the way both of their careers are going. McGregor's never pulled out of a fight. He's always entertaining. Say what you want about him, he always delivers in fight night. Same thing for Max Holloway. Who hasn't that guy fought? He's fought literally everyone. You can't not consider Max Holloway a BMF. So I think if I was doing a fresh matchup, I would do Holloway and McGregor too. I think it would even make sense right now.
Okay, I like it. All right, Goes, how about you? BMF title, is it as exciting as when they headline with a proper title? And also, who do you think would be, let's say they did this annually, who would be a good set of candidates for next year's BMF?
Well, look, this fight, it sells itself, right? I mean, both guys, their reputations, we just know what we're in for. We're going to be excited. Does the BMF add any extra excitement to it? On my hat, like, I don't hate it, but at the same time, like, to me, it just seems kind of weird that you can't lose it. That's what's a little strange to me. And I feel like the fighters that are involved, yes, what you do in the cage is very important, but I also think like you gotta have like a little edge to it, right? Like Nate Diaz and Jorge Masvidal have a little edge to them. I think that's why it made it a BMF. Aside from what they're able to do in the cage, the edge that they brought into it, that persona, I think has a little bit to play with. And when you look at Justin Gaethje and Dustin Poirier, they're two of the nicest dudes you'll ever meet in person, man. So in a way, that BMF title kind of falls a little bit for me. But if you were going to do another one, I don't know that I could point to particular people, but I would point to a division. I think bantamweight, definitely do the BBMF over there, the baddest bantamweight motherfucker in the world. Like, that would be dope. And I guess if I have to give you a name, maybe Henry Cejudo and Merab Dvalishvili. Those two guys can get pretty edgy and can kind of get in each other's faces. I think that would be a fun fight.
I like it. Good job, Goes. So that one caught me off guard there a little bit. All right, Danny, how about you? Are you fired up? You know, some people are saying in the chat that maybe this was the UFC's way of squeezing $80 out of us by just throwing that on there. Maybe they shouldn't do it annually, blah, blah, blah. But how about you? Okay, for one, who isn't pumped up about it, right? So more or less the question is, are you more pumped up than, for example, let's say the Vancouver card. No slight at the GOAT or anything like that, but Aldana versus Nunes, that wasn't everyone's cup of tea either.
No, I'm definitely pumped up. I mean, for all the reasons that Farah and Ghost pointed out, I mean, this fight is just amazing. We saw the first one, and the second one just promises to be just as good, if not better. Like this fight's just you're grabbing two of the most exciting fighters in the history of the sport. Like the amount of performance of the night and fight night bonuses that these two have is just ridiculous. And they just happen to be elite fighters too. So you're kind of checking all the boxes, because sometimes these wild fights usually are seen at a lower level, not really at the very elite where there's a lot on the line. So there's a lot of refinement, a lot of calculated risks. These guys just kind of, again, it's a car crash, like Farah said. So I absolutely love this fight. But I also do agree with the people on the chat. It is a way to jazz up a pay-per-view. It is a way to make a pay-per-view feel like a pay-per-view, because the UFC has had this routine of making pay-per-views have a title on the line, right? We've seen a few that have not, right? Like probably the most recent one, Masvidal versus Colby Covington. But really, outside of a few things like Nate Diaz and Conor and this and that, they really always want to get a belt in there because it feels important. It feels special. It feels like these numbered events, they're must see. Maybe not because they don't have the biggest talent, but at least for just relevancy, like it is something big happening in the sport. I don't like the BMF title being in circulation. Again, style-wise and just savagery-wise, yes, these two are bad motherfuckers, as Go said. But I think the BMF title was more than that, because we can apply that to a lot of people. Look, Dan Hooker, if we want to stick around in that same weight class, look at what he did against Jalen Turner. There's a lot of guys that are ready to bite down under mouthpiece and throw down. I mean, you can do Michael Chandler as well if you want to stick around in that same weight class. So I don't really think the BMF belt is about that. Is a little bit about that, but also about kind of some edginess, about the street factor outside of it. And that's what the Nate Diaz and Jorge Masvidal fight was exactly that, because Nate Diaz has always been about it. Jorge Masvidal as well. It's just one's 305, the other one's 209. But it just kind of was perfect for that moment. And it felt like if there was ever a title on the line, and also these guys were superstars, but at the same time, maybe not at the very, very elite level to be challenging for belts, or at least be winning them. So it kind of felt fitting to honor them, because they are badass fighters with a belt. And I feel like by making more of these fights, you're diluting the original idea, the historical moment that fight had. And I would hate to see it in circulation, because you're diluting furthermore the 155-pound belt. I am happy, hopefully this, because it's technically a championship fight, this does mean that more money is going to be allocated to both Gaethje and Poirier. So I'm happy about that. I'm always happy for fighters to be making a bigger buck, and I will never hate on that. But the whole BMF idea, like, I don't know. Something's missing. I don't think it matches 100% the original spirit of the BMF belt. But am I excited to watch it? Yes. And I would pay for the pay-per-view even if there wasn't that title on the line. And I've done it before. Again, I just mentioned Masvidal versus Colby Covington. It doesn't have to be Conor always. So I would have been fine with this just being a pay-per-view, so long as, you got good fights in there. I don't need to see a title fight every time. But that's not the rules that the UFC plays with. So I guess we're getting a BMF title fight here. But yeah.
And I think you nailed on something here. The BMF originally maybe gave an opportunity for Masvidal or Diaz, who didn't win a major belt, a chance to have that, have that moment. And The Rock presented it. Duran walked out with Masvidal. It was in New York City, for crying out loud. It sold a lot of pay-per-views. So the fight definitely carries weight in terms of the history of MMA. It has to be the right time. Maybe annually isn't enough. I don't know about World Cup style every 4 years. That might be too long to wait. But I do like Poirier and Gaethje for the next one.
I'd say this. I think that fight feels more, the BMF title for this pay-per-view feels more out of necessity than the actual UFC going and looking at that fight and be like, you know what? That's actually fitting for the BMF belt, in my opinion. But again, I'm not hating on the fight. I'm going to watch it. It's an amazing fight. I just hating on the idea of the BMF belt coming back to live. I would have loved to see that be just exclusive to Nate Diaz and Jorge Masvidal.
I would have loved to see Carlos Condit and Matt Brown fight for it. Like, there's just certain names, man, that had just been some badasses over the years, and putting him in the cage with that belt on the line would be pretty classic. All right, Joseph Boza, was him that said it. The chat is asking for some shine. Thank you, Joseph Boza. It was hard to find it amongst all the bozos arguing over whether the earth is flat or not. But let's give you some shine. And then let's finish up with this. Michael Venom Page was spotted at the UFC London card. How much of a priority should it be for the UFC to sign MVP? Go first. Keep it tight. We're almost at the end.
I don't know that it's the biggest priority for the UFC. Everybody aspires to be in the UFC, but let's keep it real. It's that division. The fighters in there, the experience levels are off the chart, man. If you look at guys like Usman, right, and Covington, they're wrestling heavy. You got guys like Gilbert Burns, Michael Chiesa, they're submission heavy. I don't know if Michael Venom Page wants to go there. I would go to PFL, try and make $1 million, be a fresh face over there.
Okay. How about you, Danny? You agree with Goes or?
No, I disagree with Goes here. I'd love to see Michael Venom Page in the UFC. There's tons of like good matchups for him. Do I see him as a champion? No, but can he have amazing fights against a guy like Vicente Luque or Jeff Neal or Stephen Thompson, for God's sakes, or Shavkat Rakhmonov? I'm down for those fights. And the UFC needs them. If we look at this past UFC London card, like it was all right. But having a name like Michael Venom Page, I would say he might have even been sort of the biggest attraction or the biggest star if he would have been on the card. So I think for that market, because it's clearly important for the UFC, they keep coming back to it. Yeah, Michael Venom Page is a big figure, and I'd love to see him in the UFC.
All right, Fada, looks like you're leaning that way as well. What did you think of the pop that he got out there?
Yeah, I'm going to agree with Danny here. And I spoke to MVP a few weeks ago when I was in London. And when I asked him, I said, what are your goals right now in your career? He said, I want to continue to make people feel something, like to entertain them. And because he's saying that, I think, it's time for him to compete in the UFC. You don't have to match him up against grapplers and stuff like that. It doesn't even have to be a matter of the title picture for him. He is 36. He could just go out there and have entertaining fights. And like Danny said, a lot of people were kind of complaining about this London card. And if MVP was on it, he for sure would have been one of the biggest attractions on it. So why not? I would want to see him. I think he has a lot of personality, a very exciting fighting style. And I would love to kind of see him compete at the O2. And there are a lot of matchups, a lot of fun matchup with guys that are ranked and have credible resumes that he could go up against, because of course he holds multiple records for Bellator for most finishes, most wins in the welterweight division. So he's a guy who's experienced and fought the who's who. So you would want to match him up against solid names. Shout out to Johnny Parsons for calling him out. He kind of butchered his call. I don't know why Patty came out of his mouth in the octagon, but then when he went out in the back, he said, I meant to call out MVP. I don't hate it. Is he going to get the fight? Probably not. But like, I don't hate that he's calling him out. He's obviously somebody that people see as a name that you want to fight. So yeah, I would want to see him in the UFC.
And you know what? He's been violent. He's had a few endings that have been pretty violent. John McCarthy says the one against Cyborg was about it unsettled him about as much as any fight he's ever done. And that's the one where he cracked his skull, male Cyborg, former husband of Chris Cyborg. So he's delivered on that end. And may I say, also a Manchester United fan, MVP. All right, last one, guys, super tight. Let's do it. Javier Mendez says it's not going to be GSP against Khabib in grappling. Who should it be? So I even sped things up a little bit here. Danny, give me a name. GSP against who? Grappling. Give me 10 seconds worth.
Damian Maia. I think he threw that name out there. I think for the OGs, maybe for the newer guys, are going to be like, who? But Damian Maia, we all love him. It'd be a nice treat for the OG. So I'm going to go with Damian.
Fada, how about you? GSP versus who?
Yeah, I'm going to go with Maia as well, because you also need a name that like Danny said, maybe the new wave fans might not know him, but he is a name, like a legend. When you think jiu-jitsu, you think Damian Maia. So yeah, I like that pick.
ADCC champ too. It might be a little too much for GSP that he's asking for there. How about you guys?
Same. I mean, GSP always tested himself against the best at MMA. Why not continue that in grappling? Damian Maia is a legend.
Okay. All right. Three-headed monster. They're all going with Damian Maia. How about Kevin Lee? He just retired. They used to be teammates, and Kevin Lee didn't have a bad ground game. Maybe that could put some money in K. Lee's pocket against the legend. Who knows? I don't know if it's big enough to sell, though. No disrespect. Folks, thank you so much for tuning in. Every Monday, noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. Check it out. Spinning Back Clique. And, of course, the replay is up So if you caught on halfway through, you can just go in there and check out the replay to this fantastic show. Thank you again to the Facebook audience for tuning in. It sounds like this will be a weekly thing for you guys as well, joining the YouTube audience. Don't forget, Ghost and I are going to be hosting a watch along UFC 291 this Saturday, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Fada, are we doing some preview before that?
Yes, we are.
The preview show. Okay, 5 Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific with Fada Hanoun. Check that out. Folks, we're out of here. Enjoy the rest of your day. Go out and be a champion.